You probably think humans have been smoking for as long as they've known how to make fire. After all, if our ancestors spent their days sitting around campfires, wouldn't they have eventually noticed that certain plants produced interesting effects when burned? It sounds like a reasonable assumption, but the truth is much stranger. While humans mastered fire hundreds of thousands of years ago, the earliest evidence that people deliberately inhaled smoke from specific plants appeared much later. And when it finally did, smoking wasn't about relaxation, addiction, or even recreation. At first, it may have been about communicating with spirits, healing the sick, or entering completely altered states of consciousness. So when did ancient humans actually start smoking? And what convinced someone to take that very first intentional breath? To answer that, we need to go back long before cigarettes, cigars, or even tobacco existed. For most of human history, early humans lived as hunter-gatherers. Fire was one of the most important technologies they ever developed. It provided warmth, protection from predators, cooked food, and became the center of social life. Every evening, families gathered around flames. They cooked meat, shared stories, repaired tools, and planned the next day's hunt. That meant they were constantly surrounded by smoke. But breathing smoke by accident isn't the same as intentionally inhaling it. There's a huge difference between standing near a campfire and deliberately placing a specific plant into the flames because you believe it will do something special. For thousands upon thousands of years, there's no convincing evidence that early humans practiced smoking the way later cultures did. Instead, smoke itself probably had practical uses. Burning certain plants helped drive away insects. Green branches created thick clouds that kept mosquitoes at bay. Some aromatic woods produced pleasant scents inside shelters. Without realizing it, ancient people were already discovering that different plants produced different kinds of smoke. Some irritated the eyes. Some smelled sweet. Others had unusual effects when accidentally inhaled. Those accidental discoveries may have planted an important idea. What if certain plants could change the way you felt? Of course, figuring that out wasn't simple. Most wild plants are harmless. Some are useful, and some are incredibly dangerous. Experimenting with unknown plants could easily make someone sick, or worse. Yet humans have always been remarkably curious. Across every continent, people slowly learned which berries were edible, which roots could be cooked, and which herbs eased pain or fever. It wasn't a huge leap to wonder whether burning those same plants might unlock entirely different effects. And eventually, some cultures discovered exactly that. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The first plants humans intentionally smoked probably weren't tobacco at all. In fact, tobacco only grows naturally in the Americas. That means if people in Africa, Europe, Asia, or Australia were smoking thousands of years ago, they must have been using completely different plants. So what were they burning? And why? Those answers reveal something fascinating about the earliest civilizations and about the remarkable lengths humans have always gone to in their search for healing, meaning, and altered states of mind. But if tobacco wasn't the first plant people smoked, what was? The answer isn't as straightforward as you might think. Unlike stone tools or pottery, smoke leaves almost no trace behind. Once a fire burns out, the evidence usually disappears with it. That makes discovering the origins of smoking surprisingly difficult. Archaeologists can't simply dig up an ancient cigarette or a perfectly preserved pipe and declare the mystery solved. Instead, they have to piece together tiny clues scattered across thousands of years. Microscopic plant residues trapped inside ancient pipes, burn marks on ceremonial objects, chemical traces preserved in soil. Even fossilized human dental plaque can contain tiny particles that reveal what people once inhaled or chewed. It's a bit like solving a crime scene where most of the evidence vanished thousands of years ago. For decades, researchers believed smoking began relatively recently, perhaps only a few thousand years ago. But every few years, new discoveries push that timeline further back. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from the Americas. Archaeologists studying ancient settlements found chemical residues of nicotine on stone pipes dating back more than 3,000 years. Even more surprising, recent evidence suggests wild tobacco may have been used by humans nearly 12,000 years ago, shortly after the last ice age. That's thousands of years before cities, before writing, before metal tools. It completely changes our understanding of how early people interacted with plants. But here's something even more fascinating. Those ancient people weren't growing tobacco in neat rows like modern farmers. Wild tobacco is very different from the commercial tobacco used today. Its leaves contain extremely high levels of nicotine, often much stronger than modern cultivated varieties. A small amount could produce intense physiological effects. That raises an obvious question. Why would anyone willingly inhale something so powerful? To answer that, we have to stop thinking like modern smokers. Today, smoking is often associated with habit, recreation, or addiction. Ancient societies had very different motivations. Across cultures, certain plants were viewed as gifts from nature, capable of connecting humans with forces beyond the physical world. Shamans, healers, and spiritual leaders experimented with herbs, roots, and leaves, carefully observing how each affected the body and mind. Some soothed pain, others sharpened alertness. A few induced vivid dreams or trance-like states. Inhaling smoke was simply another way of delivering those compounds into the body. And sometimes, it worked remarkably fast. Unlike eating a plant, inhaling its smoke allows many chemicals to enter the bloodstream through the lungs. Within seconds, ancient people may not have understood the biology, but they certainly noticed the results. If one method consistently produced stronger effects than another, that knowledge would have been passed down through generations. Eventually, those practices became traditions, then rituals, and finally, an important part of many cultures. What's remarkable is that this idea didn't appear in just one place. While tobacco became deeply rooted in the Americas, people across Africa, Europe, Asia, and Australia discovered entirely different plants with similar properties. Some burned cannabis, others used mugwort. In parts of Australia, native communities inhaled smoke from medicinal plants during healing ceremonies. In ancient Eurasia, archaeological evidence suggests cannabis may have been burned during funerary rituals, filling enclosed spaces with thick, fragrant smoke. Different plants, different cultures, but a surprisingly similar idea. Smoke wasn't simply something to avoid. It could heal, protect, purify, or even help communicate with the spiritual world. And that's where the story becomes even more intriguing. Because before smoking became a personal habit, it was often a shared experience, one that brought entire communities together during ceremonies, celebrations, and moments of profound significance. As societies grew more organized, smoking became something much more than an experiment with unusual plants. It became a ritual. Across the ancient world, smoke was often seen as a bridge between the human world and something beyond it. Long before written religions emerged, many communities believed that invisible forces shaped everyday life. Spirits lived in forests, rivers, mountains, and even the sky itself. To communicate with them, people developed ceremonies that involved music, dancing, fire, and smoke. When certain plants were burned, the rising smoke wasn't just something you could see. It was something you could feel. Some herbs relaxed the body. Others sharpened the senses. A few produced vivid visions or dreamlike experiences that participants interpreted as messages from the spirit world. Whether those experiences were spiritual or simply the effects of naturally occurring chemicals, they had a profound impact on the people who experienced them. Over time, these ceremonies became traditions passed from one generation to the next, and smoking slowly became part of culture itself. One fascinating example comes from the Eurasian steppes. In 2019, archaeologists studying ancient wooden braziers found in high-altitude burials discovered residues containing unusually high levels of THC, the main psychoactive compound in cannabis. The evidence suggests that during funeral ceremonies, people intentionally burned specially selected cannabis plants inside enclosed spaces, allowing mourners to inhale the smoke. Why? Researchers aren't entirely sure. Perhaps it helped participants enter a trance. Perhaps it eased grief. Or perhaps it symbolized a connection between the living and the dead. Whatever the reason, it shows that ancient people weren't simply burning random plants. They understood that different species produced different effects, and they intentionally chose the ones that suited their rituals. Medicine was another important reason. Without pharmacies or modern hospitals, nearly every society relied on plants for healing. Some herbs reduced pain, others relieved coughing, opened airways, or eased breathing. Burning medicinal plants created smoke that could be inhaled directly, delivering their active compounds. quickly into the lungs. In some cultures, people believed smoke itself carried healing properties. Homes were cleansed with fragrant herbs after illness. Smoke was used to drive away insects that spread disease. Newborn children and their mothers were sometimes surrounded by aromatic smoke as part of purification ceremonies. Today, many of these practices might sound symbolic, but surprisingly, some had practical benefits. Certain aromatic plants naturally repel insects. Others contain antimicrobial compounds. Although ancient people didn't know about bacteria or viruses, generations of observation helped them recognize what seemed to work. Experience often came long before scientific explanation. As civilizations expanded, so did the exchange of ideas. Trade routes connected distant cultures, carrying spices, medicines, precious metals, and knowledge. Plants that had once grown in isolated regions began appearing hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away. People experimented with unfamiliar herbs, adapting them to local customs and beliefs. Then came one of the most important turning points in the history of smoking. When Europeans arrived in the Americas during the late 15th century, they encountered something unlike anything they had seen before. Many indigenous peoples cultivated tobacco with extraordinary care. It wasn't treated as an ordinary crop. In many communities, it played a central role in diplomacy, healing ceremonies, storytelling, and religious rituals. European explorers were fascinated. Some believed tobacco possessed remarkable medicinal powers. Others simply found its effects intriguing. Within only a few decades, tobacco seeds had crossed the Atlantic. From there, the plant spread with astonishing speed. Fields of tobacco appeared across Europe, then Africa, then Asia. Eventually, it reached nearly every inhabited continent. What had once been a sacred ceremonial plant was transformed into a global commodity. Its meaning began to change. Smoking gradually shifted from a rare ritual, practiced on special occasions, to something woven into daily life. And with that transformation came consequences no one at the time could have imagined. The very habit that once symbolized healing, spirituality, and community would eventually become one of the most widespread and controversial behaviors in human history. But before we judge those ancient traditions through a modern lens, there's one final question we need to answer. What does the story of smoking actually reveal about us as a species? Because in many ways, this isn't really a story about tobacco at all. It's a story about curiosity. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that humans have always been experimenters. Long before laboratories, textbooks, or scientific journals existed, our ancestors were constantly testing the world around them. Which plants were safe to eat? Which ones eased pain? Which ones kept insects away? And eventually, which ones changed the way they felt? Smoking wasn't invented overnight. It wasn't the idea of one clever individual sitting beside a campfire. Instead, it was the result of thousands of years of observation, trial and error, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Some discoveries were probably accidents. A branch thrown onto a fire produced an unfamiliar scent. An herb burn during a ceremony made people feel calm. A healer noticed that inhaling the smoke from a certain plant seemed to ease someone's cough. Little by little, those observations became traditions, and those traditions became culture. What's remarkable is that many ancient societies reached similar conclusions without ever meeting one another. Communities separated by oceans and thousands of kilometers discovered completely different plants that served surprisingly similar purposes. Some sought medicine, others sought spiritual experiences, others simply explored the natural world around them. It reminds us that curiosity may be one of humanity's oldest instincts. But history also shows us something else. The meaning of smoking has changed dramatically over time. For many indigenous cultures, tobacco wasn't an everyday habit. It was often reserved for ceremonies, diplomacy, offerings, or moments of deep spiritual significance. It was treated with respect rather than consumed casually. That changed after global trade transformed tobacco into a mass-produced commodity. What had once been sacred gradually became commercial. By the 17th and 18th centuries, tobacco was spreading across Europe at an extraordinary pace. New methods of cultivation made it cheaper. Trade networks expanded. Smoking became fashionable among nobles, merchants, soldiers, and eventually ordinary citizens. Centuries later came cigarettes, industrial manufacturing, aggressive advertising, and worldwide consumption on a scale no ancient society could have imagined. Ironically, the same plant that many cultures viewed as a powerful ceremonial tool became associated with one of the largest public health challenges in modern history. That's why it's important to separate two very different stories: the history of smoking and the history of commercial tobacco. They aren't the same. One is a story about human curiosity, ritual, and our relationship with the natural world. The other is a story shaped by agriculture, economics, industry, and medicine. Understanding that difference helps us see the past more clearly. It's easy to judge ancient people using modern knowledge, but they didn't know about nicotine addiction. They didn't understand cancer or cardiovascular disease. They were simply doing what humans have always done: observing nature, experimenting with new ideas, and trying to make sense of the world around them. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of this entire story. Every ordinary habit has an extraordinary beginning. Whether it's cooking food, wearing clothes, brushing our teeth, or even smoking, each began with someone asking a simple question: what happens if I try this? That single question has driven human progress for hundreds of thousands of years. Sometimes it led to incredible discoveries. Sometimes it led to unexpected consequences. But it never stopped pushing our species forward. So the next time you see smoke rising into the air, remember that you're looking at something humans have gathered around for hundreds of thousands of years. Not just for warmth, not just for survival, but for curiosity. Because long before smoke became a habit, it was a mystery. And humans have always had a hard time resisting a mystery. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden origins of one of humanity's oldest behaviors, there are plenty more everyday mysteries hiding in our past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.